Hey, it's good to be home. It's nice to be with so many people in the room that I know. I know a number of you were here when Mayor Pavia, Republican, gave his address earlier this morning. If you could get the mayor to coordinate his message with my opponent, it might be a good thing. Because I want to be very clear, we're very proud of what we did here in Stamford. Lowering crime by 63%, making Stamford one of the 10 safest cities in America. Building more housing than any other city in the state, and more housing in its downtown than in just about any city in the United States on a per capita basis, and requiring that 10% of all new multifamily housing be set aside as affordable. We set aside more open space during my tenure as mayor than at any time in our history. We built infrastructure for the next generation that we can be proud of. We have a sewage treatment plant that meets standards that are not even applicable yet. We did some amazing things, including changing very substantially an urban school system. And by the way, just so you know, because I had somebody call the superintendent, 70% of Stamford's children read on a proficient basis, and 60% are on goal, one of the highest rates of any urban area in America. So it's indeed a great pleasure to be back here and talk, I thought, about the economy and what we need to do in the state of Connecticut. And I absolutely have a very different position than that of Mr. Foley. But Mr. Foley actually has a different position today than the one he wrote about when he wrote for this publication, a copy of which is available to all of you. Because in it, and you've heard him acknowledge that there's a $3.4 billion deficit in the next year of the biennium, on page 23, I believe it is, the second step in my plan is to reduce the size and cost of state government. I will order a comprehensive analysis of how your money is being spent and determine the best way to reduce spending. My initial goal is to cut spending by $2 billion. I didn't go to Harvard. I went to Boston College, by the way. But the last time I checked, the difference between $3.4 billion and $2 billion was $1.4 billion. And anytime someone tells you that they're going to be able to balance their budget without taking all factors into consideration, you have to do the math for them. And I want to be very clear that it is our hope that we can make government run more efficient. Because after all, during the 14 years that I was mayor, we reduced the city-sized government by 8.4%, all in an effort to properly support an urban educational system to reach the kind of goals that we just discussed. Now, Connecticut has some very serious problems, and I don't want to paper over those problems at all. After all, we're paying 76% more for electricity than the national average. If you want to know why Connecticut's lost more manufacturing jobs than any other state in New England or the Mid-Atlantic on a per capita basis, in my opinion, it's electric costs. Now, I know government does a bad job in formulating regulations and not testing its tax policy. That's why I say that all of our tax policy needs to be benchmarked against our most immediate competition: Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island. Ultimately against all of our competition within the 50 states. And then ultimately we need to know what our advantages are and disadvantages are with the rest of the world. We need to do that and undertake that immediately. We need to compare ourselves to the competition who's currently beating us. But we also need to understand that one of the, when CNBC ranks states for doing business in, and we performed so miserably, one of the factors that was specifically mentioned was the high cost of energy, or in opposite, the lower cost in Massachusetts, which got a number 5 ranking versus our much lower ranking. We've got to be serious about lowering the cost of electricity in the state of Connecticut if we're going to be competitive again. That's why it's in our plan. danmalloy.com, you can see the Malloy-Wyman plan in all of its detail. Addressing issues like higher education, pre-K through 12 education, economic investment, job growth. All of it's there to be tested, to be read, and even to be compared if we have faulty numbers. I also want to be very clear that I believe that Connecticut's government has failed us all. I think the compromises that Republican governors and Democratic legislators have reached over a long period of time have not been in our best interest. After all, how could we, with such poorly financed pension plans, continue to not make the required payments into those plans to make sure that there would be sufficient proceeds in the future? After all, how could we cut back on infrastructure investment even as we see our roads and buildings crumble around us? After all, how could we shift to having one of the most expensive public higher educational systems in America? I mean, we could go on and on and on and talk about the bad compromises that have produced the kinds of results that we can't be proud of. And then we can discuss how we change direction. So let's be very clear. If I'm elected and I'm sworn in on January 5th, I'll raise my right hand, I'll take that oath, I'll put my hand down when I'm done taking the oath, and I will sign an executive order that requires Connecticut departments and agencies to report under GAAP finance rules, generally accepted accounting principles. Now, I want to be very clear why that's important, because it is a structural and systemic change. Or let me explain it to you a step further. Connecticut state government requires that every board of education, every local government, every non-state government report under GAAP. It exempts one government. You're right, state government. If we had required GAAP finance rules to be followed over the last 16 years, we would have been forced to deal with the extensive problems that both Mr. Foley and I are prepared to talk about. We need real structural change, and I'm prepared to bring that about in the state of Connecticut. By the way, after I sign the executive order requiring my state departments and agencies to report under that, we will then take a step further and go to the legislature and ask them to put that into action into the laws of the state of Connecticut. Understand that a Republican governor in the past 16 years has refused the legislator's request to do that.